I was coaching CrossFit today, which in and of itself isn't all that exciting. I coach CrossFit lots of days. But like many workout gyms, music is a key piece of what gets people going. And I always ask, who wants to choose the music today? Who wants the style of music? And invariably, we choose a playlist based on a certain style of music. Like I like to listen to Bruce Springsteen radio because I like Bruce Springsteen. So a playlist like that on Pandora or Spotify will have a ton of Bruce Springsteen songs, but also songs of that sort of similar genre that were popular at the time. So you get a whole variety, a plethora of songs from the 70s and 80s that were popular in and around the time that Bruce was popular. Well, I have several favorites. I have Indigo Girls Radio. So Indigo Girls Radio is more reflective of like 90s, 90s female contemporary, not country, but folk singers. I'm in a CrossFit gym. I'm coaching. We're choosing music. I'm old, right? I'm 62. I'm not like the young, strapping, muscular dude that covered with tattoos that typically is seen coaching a CrossFit class. I'm a lot of things. It sort of dawned on me that 90% of the music chosen is centered around bands that were popular in the 70s, sometimes the late 60s, sometimes the early 80s. But the 70s just had this plethora of music that 50 plus years later is still listened to regularly by people, purchased, enjoyed, played at bars, played at weddings. DJs play these songs. And I got to thinking about when I was in high school, like in the 80s, that would be like me listening to music from the 30s, which of course I would never have listened to. 1930s would have been more like big band. Now, granted, there were times that music was played, but it wasn't something I would have chosen to listen to on the radio, right? I would have listened to modern music, contemporary music. It got me thinking as I was driving home in my hot car today, which I love. I was listening to a different podcast and the OK Boomer thing came up and how OK Boomer really took off sort of during COVID. A lot of weird things happened during COVID. Lots and lots of people in the baby boomer generation were more susceptible to dying of COVID than people much younger. And so it was sort of like, oh, boomer extinction. How do we thin out the boomers? And it just became sort of a joke. And then, of course, there's the whole OK Boomer, which is any generation beyond us sort of belittling us and making us feel bad for being old. As a boomer / Generation Jones, because in my research around being a baby boomer, a bunch of us in sort of the second third of the baby boomer generation, the baby boomer generation spans 18 years. That's a long time. Most of them are 15 years. So if the baby boomer generation stopped at 62, then I would be a Gen X. And I have a lot of similar qualities to Gen X. So the biggest difference between baby boomers and Gen X is that baby boomers, for the most part, were raised in families that were nuclear families, mom and dad at home, 5 o'clock dinner time, church on Sundays, living in neighborhoods with other families just like you. So the positives of it, I believe, remain positive. The negatives of it have been, tumultuous in following generations. Gen X, which was the next generation, were the quote-unquote latchkey kids. This is when moms started leaving the home and going to work, when kids came home from school and nobody was home, when after-school activities started. It was during Gen X childhood time that we started having a bigger focus on children getting kidnapped and missing children and all the after-school activities that started becoming really prevalent for these kids in the 80s and 90s. I'm a boomer. Okay, boomer. I'm going to own it, right? I'm the very tail end of the boomer generation. And like anyone on either side of their generation, they're going to have aspects of the one they either preceded them or follows them. And I looked up and found an article that says 7 boomer habits that remain good. So I'm going to talk about boomer habits. Then I'm going to get back to the music piece. The first 5 or 6 years of my childhood were very reflective of a baby boomer-esque generation. I remember sitting around the kitchen table to eat. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. We didn't watch Disney every Sunday night, but we did watch Lawrence Welk on Saturday nights. Like we had family time. We did these things as a family. There's a list of things here that baby boomers habits that remain positive. So one is keeping commitments. So I'm way more Gen X here. I'm pretty good at keeping commitments, but in general, your word and a handshake was solid. Didn't need a signature. People didn't back out of things. Didn't mean it was always good to keep your word. There are times when, stepping out of a commitment you thought was right makes more sense than honoring it. Gardening for your own table. So this is something that is on the influx now, given all the issues around food and the unhealthy food in America. But I remember that one of the first things you did when you moved into a house was you had a kitchen garden. And sometimes it was spices and things, vegetable garden. It was very, very common in my younger years to see vegetable gardens. A lot of people in my neighborhood have gardens, none of whom are boomers, quite honestly. I think it's a trend that's returning. Living within your means. So this is a huge one. So when you remove cash from society, my opinion here, you remove the meaning of how much a dollar bill is worth. When I would come home from waitressing at Weeks and count my tips, I know how hard I worked for that pile of change and those $1 bills. I worked really hard for them. And I understood that 6 hours of work gave me this many tips, which bought me almost a pair of sneakers. That's when I realized how hard I worked. And so living within your means was really expected. That was a practice that people did. I was not raised that way. My mom was big into credit cards, and she would get money from my bio dad, and we were constantly in debt. Listening to my parents fight about money is one of the most, and they were the silent generation, so I don't know what that says about them. But I am better at living within my means, but right now I spend far more money than I should, and I'm anxious about finding ways to stop that. Keeping a physical calendar. Oh my gosh, yes, I do this. I don't have it with me. I write things down. I have a physical calendar. I have it in my phone as well. But if my phone drops in a river, I wouldn't drop my calendar on my wall in a river. We have calendars in every room in our house. That one I'm totally boomer on. The next boomer-esque thing that I think is a good thing is repairing before replacing. So here's where I feel on that. We have a fridge in our garage that's probably 30, 40 years old. 30 years old, easily. We've had it for a long time. I always got secondhand appliances because they last forever. Appliances now last 5 or 6 years, and then you don't replace parts and fix them. You just get a new one. Washing machines, dryers, nothing lasts like they used to last. And that really bothers me. And it reminds me of the whole light bulb scenario. When light bulbs were first invented, they were fabulous. They lasted for years. And then they realized, okay, we're not going to make any money on these things because people only need to buy them once. So they made them less, they lowered the quality so they would only last a short time. So you'd have to buy new ones. Greedy, greedy, greedy. So yeah, replacing before repairing. I think we always try to fix things in my house before we just ditch it and buy a new one. Getting enough sleep. So yes, I would say based on watching Gracie's Living Habits, I would say Gen X is probably similar with baby boomers here because the early Gen Xers really were still living, a lot of families were still boomer-esque, so to speak. But going to bed at a certain time was mandatory. I was in bed before dark in the summertime when I was little. We're terrible with Jack. Jack goes to sleep when we go to sleep, and we don't tend to go up until 9 or 9:30. I think we're not so great. I'm not such a boomer in that. Being patient on long-term goals. So there have been times that I've set a long-term goal and been very patient and very diligent in working toward the fruition of that goal. I think I'm boomer-esque in that regard, but I also know people from many generations that can set a goal and be patient and work toward it. The problem now is that having something like Siri or Alexa or Google or any of the search engines is you can find an answer to a question within a millisecond. So every successive generation has little patience and loses executive functioning because you don't have to do any of the steps to finish something. I remember, I've said this before, when special ed testing went from having to manually score the test to just plug the numbers into the computer and get a printed out report, saved me hours of work. But I also lost a lot of learning. Analyzing the scores, adding up the numbers, seeing what went where, taught me as much about the kid as the scores did. And that goes away. Now you're just looking at a number. You've put a number in, and it gives you a description of that number. When you score the test yourself, you see so much more into it. Being grateful. Gratitude is making like a big return now. Oh, we should be grateful. But of course, I just did a podcast episode on toxic gratitude, so there we go. I think the gratitude piece comes because a lot of baby boomers were just ahead of, baby boomers' parents. The silent generation came through the Depression and into the baby boomer generation with a good economy and some peace times and, sort of doing well. But we're always taught, you never know. Be grateful for what you have because you never know if you're going to keep it. So I could see that. And being grateful for the everyday stuff. Making space for real life connections. So this, I feel, took a hit through COVID when everything started to be remote and people realized you can do things from your own home and you don't really have to leave. And texting, I remember when texting first came along, high school kids didn't talk on their phones anymore. I'm not going to call them on the phone. That's stupid. Okay, well, you have a phone. So texting became this big thing, and it just adds a layer of separation that is probably, in my mind, quite unhealthy. Keeping screens out of the bedroom. So Kenny is far more boomer than I am. He's 8 years older than me. He's right smack in the middle of that generation. And he grew up in a house that had a TV in every room, a TV in the kitchen, TV in the bedrooms, TV in the like everywhere. So when he and I first got together, I had one TV. It was in the living room. When you were done watching TV, you went to bed and the TV wasn't in there. When we moved in here to this house, very quickly there was a TV in the bedroom, a TV in the living room. Then there was a TV in the front room that the girls could watch when they got bigger. And then there was a little TV in the kitchen. The only room we don't have a TV in right now is the bathroom. Like there's no TV in this room in my office right now. But in my house, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 TVs. And only 3 of us live here. We have a TV on the porch. We've fallen right into the modern society around screens and all that kind of stuff. Letting time do its job. So this is another one that goes away with the advent of the cell phone. You don't need to let time do its job. You can rush it. You can rush things. And I mostly feel like this is detrimental to family, detrimental to health, detrimental to community. You know, people I want to lose weight now. Give me a pill. You take a pill or a shot and you get skinny fast. Well, okay, but you stop the shot and now you're heavy again. So how healthy is that? And all the thing, we all want the quick fixes, you know. Now, let me be clear. I love my inhaler. I did not grow up in a time where asthmatics had inhalers. So I very much appreciate not having to spend 5 days in the hospital to recover from an asthma attack. I love the fact that I can inhale a puffer, I call it, and my lungs open up. So that's a good thing. Writing letters by hand. I still love, my sister-in-law Kathy writes letters and cards to Jack and we read them to him. I had pen pals growing up. And, you know, we can email now. We don't even need to mail a letter. We can just email things. And, you know, a well thought out email is much like receiving a letter. It's nice and you read it and it means something. You can print it out and save it. But there was something about going to the mailbox and getting a letter that somebody sat down and wrote a few days ago. And now you're reading it and then you can respond and write back and mail it. And they wait a few days. And there's a conversation that spans, you know, several days. Saving money for no reason. Yes, I remember growing up, I had a savings account and I had a passbook for it. And I was only allowed to have the passbook when I was depositing money. And then my mom took it back or my dad and put it in the drawer. And that was because you just should always have a savings account. Do I have one now? No, I don't. Finally, cooking from scratch. So I'm a single ingredient eater now. So when I make anything, I don't want any food that's been processed. So like I eat less pasta now. I would love to learn how to make chickpea pasta or something like that. I am getting away from processed foods. So I don't bake a cake from scratch or anything like that. I'm not that into cooking. But I do most definitely eat single ingredient foods. And if I cook anything for myself and put things together, there's really nothing processed at all. Other than maybe like spaghetti sauce or something like that. I do try to find the least processed version of those things as well. Those are some powerful, wonderful things, boomer habits that remain positive, and I think they do. I also think they can be attributed to a lot of other people. And I got thinking more about music because my CrossFit experience today. So today we listened to AC/DC radio. AC/DC is a 70s heavy metal band. Now on AC/DC radio were lots of other bands that to me didn't even remotely match AC/DC, but it was songs that were popular at the time. Did my little old Google, 10 boomer bands that are still popular in 2026. We have the Rolling Stones, the Eagles. I hear the Eagles a lot. AC/DC, the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Fleetwood Mac, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, and Journey. So all of these bands are bands that were unbelievably popular when I was in middle school and high school. Middle school and high schoolers of my generation went to see them in concert. I saw Aerosmith right here in Concord when they were brand new. And these songs are still incredibly popular. I just said I listen to AC/DC radio. Sometimes I listen to Aerosmith radio. In looking at boomer songs that are still popular, I found 5 boomer songs that are still massively huge that will bring us back to things. A Kiss song. Kiss was another band that's still popular. I Want to Rock and Roll All Night. I want to rock and roll all night. Party every day. AC/DC, You Shook Me All Night Long. That still plays, that's incredibly popular. You're going to have to listen to all these. I'll have to attach this link into the show notes. Dancing Queen, ABBA. So here's another band, ABBA. That was the late 70s. I was in middle school when ABBA was popular. Loved all those songs. And, you know, movies and musicals on Broadway and such can reinvent bands, make them popular. A lot of 80s music was resurrected through Stranger Things. You Should Be Dancing, the Bee Gees. So the Bee Gees, that was like the advent of disco, John Travolta. I don't hear as much of the Bee Gees. To me, that's more genre specific, like it would be attached to a musical or a movie or something like that. It wouldn't be, I don't play the Bee Gees in a CrossFit gym. Twist and Shout, the Beatles. So here we have the Beatles, which was the late 60s. So yeah, I mean, I guess those singers were boomers because they were born in the late 40s. So see, this is what I mean. Boomers go forever. Bands like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and those early bands of the 60s will always be popular because they're sort of the basis for rock and roll. Then I got looking at concert tours of 2026. Boomer concert tours, your ultimate guide, right? Bruce Springsteen, ZZ Top, Judy Collins, Darius Rucker, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon. Multitude of boomer acts on the road in 2026. I just find that fascinating. Like, each generation has something that it's really, really, really known for. And as much as the boomer generation gets trashed for not understanding technology and, maybe appearing old fashioned or stuck to the past, our music is stunning. Little Feat, James Taylor, Fish, Foo Fighters, Dave Matthews. Now, some of these bands to me seem older, but I realize, because they became popular in later generations, but I realize that the singers in these bands, some of them are Gen X, but some of them are baby boomers. Sting, Bonnie Raitt. Now, she was super popular in the 90s, but she's older than me, so she's most definitely a boomer. Luke Bryan's 49. Paul Simon, he was Simon and Garfunkel, popular in the 60s. The range of time boomer artists have been popular in music is astounding. And if I were to analyze it, I think my biggest thing is that boomers lived through the beginning of rock and roll, like the Louisiana jazz and all the basic music that was the foundation for Southern rock, all the music that was foundation for rock and roll. Rush, Judy Collins, Santana and the Doobie Brothers, Vince Gill. All of you people who are old and know all this music, you need to let me know who your favorites are or if I've missed any boomer bands. When I think to my high school and early college days, I went to Van Halen. I went to Pat Benatar. I saw James Taylor. I saw the Cars. I saw Cheap Trick. I saw the Doobie Brothers. I saw Bruce and Bruce and Bruce and a ton of Bruce. For a while, that's the only concerts I went to were Bruce concerts. And I think now I've seen Sugarland and I've seen Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift several times. So I need to maybe broaden my horizons. Ziggy Marley is touring, Lionel Richie, Earth, Wind and Fire, Melissa Etheridge and Winona Judd, John Cougar Mellencamp. He was huge. John Cougar. He was in that movie New Year's Eve, right? AC/DC is touring, Chicago and Styx. So Styx is the first record album I ever bought. Well, actually, I didn't buy it. Let me tell you a cute little love story. So I lived on Essex Street. I was in 8th grade, and I wanted the album Styx so much. And my next door neighbor was J.R. Barnes. He was his own person. He had cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, and he was skinny as can be, and he had jeans and a flannel shirt on. And I saw him walk by my house, and he was gone for like an hour, and then I saw him walk back, and he had walked downtown and bought an album. And he rang my doorbell, and he gave me the album Styx. He gave it to me, and I'm like, what? And so, oh my God, I listened to it over and over and over again. The Grand Illusion. I just was in love with Styx. Oh gosh. Guns N' Roses. That was more when I was a bit older. Leonard Skinner and Foreigner. Wu-Tang Clan. Still on the road. Mickey Dolenz. He's from the Monkees. Foreigner. Journey. Bob Dylan. These were the beginning of rock and roll. Any of you who are listening who are like Gracie's age, like Gen Z and Millennial and Gen Alpha, if you listen to any of these songs, you need to thank a boomer. I did that interview with the episodes with Gracie, and we did the OK Boomer one. And I got pissy with my editor in a funny way because I'm like, I'm not a boomer. I'm more Gen X. And that's what led me to Generation Jones. And it was sort of a bit fascinating as to what it means to be Generation Jones. I think somebody just made it up. So Generation Jones is a cohort between 54 and 65. So like the second half of baby boomers. And we're sort of the bridge between baby boomers and Gen X, which actually to me makes sense. I had so much of a Gen X childhood as the babysitter of Jonathan and Johanna. So they were like 3 and 4, and I was, 10. And so I was babysitting them. So I was only 10, but I was their babysitter. So in some ways I was a bit ahead generation-wise than they were. When I was 17, they were 10. So they were truly Gen X, whereas I was sort of somewhere in the middle there. We're pragmatic. We have a healthy distrust of government and a unique coming-of-age experience. And that, I think, is true. Because we started our childhoods in a very traditional sense, sitting around a table eating dinner. And by the time I graduated high school, my mother was working nights, my dad was in the basement, Jonathan and Johanna were running wild, and we were eating whatever my mother left on the stove. And that was such a classic Gen X reality. So we're pragmatic and resilient. There's a paradox here, keeping up with the Joneses. This is sort of how it started. Generation Jones, Jones refers to like mass consumerism, like keeping up with the Joneses. You want to keep up with everybody. Or you want Jonesing, you really want something. The word Jones is interesting other than a name. And so it reflects the generation. So we sort of missed out on a lot of the prosperous stuff our parents had. And as we get older, inflation and, the gas crisis and, oh my gosh, we had so many financial struggles as older children and young adults that our parents didn't. They really had this nice time to raise babies and afford their little houses, and moms could stay home. We have an analog childhood, phones on the wall, take notes by hand, walk to the library to check out books. But now, even in our early as our late 30s, early 40s, digital, holding up my cell phone here, I can do everything on it, do a lot of work on this thing. So we have that balance. And then mass media influence. So we grew up with television, and your show was on once a week. So if you got in trouble and got grounded and you couldn't use the TV, you were in deep doo-doo because you were going to miss the show. And there was no syndication. There was no repeats, not for a long time. You missed it. The Wizard of Oz was on once a year. I grew up with Star Trek and the Brady Bunch, and then a little bit older, Happy Days. And then my kids grew up on streaming. Well, my kids grew up on cable channels, Disney and that sort of Disney Plus and the Disney Channel. And now Jack is growing up on streaming channels. He never watches regular TV. He watches YouTube, or he watches Disney, or he watches Paramount, the stations that have the shows that he likes. Consumer behavior. We're more deliberate and value driven. I would say that's true. I can be an impulse buyer, but I know that generations that were raised on, buy now, just buy it on your phone. My daughter Gracie wastes hundreds of dollars on crap she does not need. And she doesn't really see it as a problem because it's just little bits at a time. Well, I only spent $10 here. But if she went back over a year and looked at how much she spent, it would be a couple of paychecks worth of phone cases and straws and little cheap earrings and stuff. That's sort of the Generation Jones reality. Some of our challenges, wealth accumulation. I don't know why that's a challenge. Maybe because getting old costs a lot of money now. Here's a really interesting thing. I have a friend who's in a nursing home now because she's got the beginning stages of dementia and she cannot live on her own. And they have to pay cash until they spend down their life savings so that she then can qualify for long-term care. So if you save your money and then you get sick, all your money goes to a very corrupt medical system. That's a huge challenge. That's a baby boomer challenge as well right now. Ageism in the workplace. This is huge for me. I suffer with a lot of ageism on the school board. They would all deny it and they would say I'm being snarky for saying it, but the eye rolls and the you need to let go of the past. And one of the big things that can be made negative, I actually had a conversation with my friend Jen, who just wrote her book, Lady Justice and the Sisterhood of the Crones. She talked about traditions and how we have to stop traditions. And I think we don't have to stop traditions. We have to stop being willing to do things that hurt us because in our mind it's a tradition. Well, it's just always been done this way. There are traditions that are not worth preserving. When I was in 10th grade, Tom Walton, God rest his soul, created a book in an English class called Traditions Worth Preserving. And we went all around Concord and looked at things in Concord that mattered, that would be important to preserve and remember. And I'm on a school board that wants to rename every school and just decimate the past. And it's mind-boggling sometimes how pervasive it is. And I very much feel that I'm considered old and a bit batty and crazy and that sort of thing. Caregiving. So here's my thing. I have Jack and Gracie, and I have my mother, who's taking care of me. Now, I think this is endemic to any generation, but as baby boomers are living longer and longer, as is, my mother's generation too is living longer and longer, a lot more people are old at the same time, and a lot more people need to be taken care of. So I find that can be challenging. And then finally, the biggest ways we're different, we tend to be a little more stagnant. Actual traditional boomers grew up with Woodstock. We didn't grow up with Woodstock. We Jonesers grew up with Watergate, disco. The increase of television in my generation, when I was little, it was one black and white TV. My mother grew up with a radio. Now color TVs. Now I just said TVs in every room, right? So now 24-hour news, you have access to information. And that allowed our generation to be the first to be a bit cynical of government because we were able to see more. You got to watch the movie Dick. It's such a good movie. It's all about Watergate. Older boomers came of age during revolutions like the 60s, civil rights movement, Vietnam War. I definitely feel that's a baby boomer reality. I was 5. I was a little girl when all that happened. By the time we got to be teenagers and adults, there was no more draft. Older boomers are early rock and roll, the Beatles, folk music, countercultural rebellion. We grew up with disco, punk, new wave, and early hip hop. Yeah, some great early hip hop and funk. Older boomers entered the workforce during World War II. We have a lot of competition, high inflation. It was the influx of women having high paying jobs, that sort of thing. I went way down the rabbit hole with Boomer and Generation Jones. I know I've talked about it before. But my main thing today was how much music I listen to that isn't new. How much music I listen to that from my childhood and my growing up, and how many of these songs evoke amazing memories. So as I wrap up this version of my podcast and talk about 13 Reasons Why and 13 Beautiful Things in season 13, and Molly lived to be 13, music is a huge piece of who I am and why. And I couldn't listen to it for a long time right after Molly died. But I could go year to year through my life and see who was popular each year and how those songs or that music affected me. It's fascinating. Go find a boomer and tell them how much you like them. Well, first of all, be good to yourself. Honor your generation. Honor everything that's good about you that reflects your generation. After you've been good to yourself, be good to someone else. Go find a boomer and give them a hug. And say, okay, boomer, as opposed to, okay, boomer. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.